Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Sanchez.
I know as we're continuing public input, I did want to hopefully make, I know this is not typical, but I did want to make a couple of comments if you'd allow me.
Of course.
I want to thank you all for coming out for public input and speaking on support of the Crisis Triage Center and the decision that was made 2 weeks ago. I will say, for speaking for myself, this wasn't an easy decision to make. But I think if you go back, and I appreciate, I think some of the points that are brought up was, you know, where and how, when we go back to December of 2022, there was a request at that time by HHS and by the operator, RII, to then at that time double the budget. It went from 500,000 to nearly $1 million. And at that time, some of us commissioners asked, if we're putting more money in, how are we going to work on making sure more people have access to this facility? And that's what it comes down to, is how do we get access? So we, you know, it ended up being approved. I know mainly, I will say my vote, I voted no at that time, because when I asked where the money was going, how it is going to be utilized by the provider, we got no answers. It was just on the agenda as increased by 500,000, but no explanation on how it was going to be used. A little more than a year later, here 2 weeks ago, when it came back up, generally, this is when we get money from the state, it's an easy decision. We always say yes, we take it, and we run. But the problem became is that we keep kicking the can down the road with the CTC. Nobody and if you go back and look at that agenda or that item on YouTube, nobody ever mentioned in that meeting, none of the commissioners, I don't think were aware of it. RII had a contract that was until January 31st. They were going to be, that's when they were at. And so nobody bothered to even say, hey, this, if we don't get it this time, we're going to shut down. When we approved the budget last year, it was assumed that the $1 million that we were going to be putting towards the CTC was going to be for the full year. But nobody on January 9th said, if we don't get this money, it's going to shut down. And that's a shame, because what I asked, when I asked for accountability, was if we're going to continue to put money in and we're not increasing, we're not getting more people accessing the center, well, then we need to do something different. It was not about shutting the facility down. It was just asking the question, how are we going to have a different plan here? It wasn't about us me wanting to deny the money, but how do we do something different? How do we work with DASO? How do we work with other law enforcement agencies across the county? Because I understand that this is a rural county with an urban center, and I recognize that Las Cruces PD utilized the facility. And when you look at the numbers that were presented to us by RII back in 2020, they showed us numbers of a facility they used in Peoria, Arizona, just out in the Phoenix metro area. They showed us numbers of 3,000 people per month utilizing their center. 3,000 a month, with 60 to 80%, depending on the month, coming from law enforcement. Our numbers, what I think were about 20% from law enforcement, and we got 100 people a month. And I understand, I completely agree, this is not about it being profitable or any of that. But if I know that a plan isn't working, we need a change. And so this is where I appreciate you all coming for public input, because what I expect and what I hope is that as moving forward, and I know this is, unless we have a stopgap measure and other services to fill in, that CTC will close, hopefully temporarily, because my intent is to figure out how we develop a plan. And I think this is where the public input is important, because how do we get buy-in from the clinicians, from the healthcare providers, from law enforcement and first responders, and across the county, to know that not only do we utilize the 988 service, but how do we get people access, whether they're in Garfield or, I think as the gentleman spoke, in Anapra. We're a very large county. We're bigger than 2 states. So we need a plan. We need a plan so it doesn't matter where you are in the county, people have access to behavioral health when they need it, where they need it. So I apologize that I just want to put that out there because I really appreciate you all coming out, and I know we're going to keep getting it, but I really want you to understand, at least from where I'm sitting, this was not an easy decision, and this was not about closing the CTC, but it was about how do we utilize our funds the best so that our residents have access to better services. And both in December of 2022 and January 9th, 2 weeks ago, we didn't get a lot of answers. All I was looking for as a commissioner and approving the budget was a plan. How are we going to do things differently? We can't be happy with the status quo. We need to keep growing. And as we learn, as we have more experience, then we continue to make changes in how we operate in that plan. So I just, like I said, I want to put it out there because I want you all to know that was not, when I voted no on not accepting the funds, it wasn't about closing the center, but asking how do we make changes here for the better. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize it took so long.
No, and thank you for saying that, Commissioner Sanchez. And I think that is a really good point. I think as I hear public comment, and I respect everyone and all the amazing stories that we hear about the CTC Center, I as well am very in favor of the CTC Center. I believe that it is a needed necessity here in our community. But what I will say, and what I hope drives the conversation